Hi, welcome to the Nonprofit Mastermind podcast, where every week I do a deep dive into the strategies and mindset behind launching, scaling, and leading a high-impact nonprofit. I'm your host, Brooke Richie-Babbage. Working to make the world a more just and beautiful place is messy, complex, heart-wrenching, and ultimately deeply joyful and fulfilling work. And none of us can do it alone. That's why I started this podcast, this Mastermind community, to hold space for and share the learnings and the questions and the grapplings and the actual concrete strategies that allow us to move our social impact work forward together. So welcome to the Mastermind. I'm so glad you're here. So I'm really excited to be welcoming a guest onto the show for the first time in quite some time. I'm going to be having more guests in the coming months to talk about really present and exciting topics. And I'm excited to kick that off in this episode with my good friend, Cindy Wagman. We are going to be talking about something that's really top of mind for a lot of the nonprofit executives that I work with, and that is fundraising capacity. What do you do when you actually need someone on your team with fundraising skill and expertise, and you don't actually have the budget to hire a full-time development director? Well, Cindy and I are going to break that down today in a great conversation about agencies and fractional fundraising and everything in between. Cindy Wagman is the president and founder of the Good Partnership. It's a values-driven, social justice-informed consultancy that's the home of the fractional fundraising movement, which connects small nonprofits and the fractional fundraisers that serve them. Cindy has been a certified fundraising executive since 2009, and she got her MBA at the University of Toronto in 2013. She is a real powerhouse in our sector. She has presented online and around the world on stages and pages from We Are for Good to Fundraising Everywhere. She's the host of the top-rated The Small Nonprofit podcast and the best-selling author of Raise It, The Reluctant Fundraiser's Guide to Raising Money Without Selling Your Soul. Most recently, in 2022, Cindy started coaching other nonprofit serving consultants to help them build impactful and profitable businesses. And she's the co-host of the Confessions with Jess and Cindy podcast, serving that audience. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. So listen in, grab a notebook. If you are leading a nonprofit and are trying to figure out how to staff up your development shop, this is going to be a great episode for you. Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I'm good. So happy to be here.
Oh, this is a great conversation for us to be having. We are going to talk today about how small and growing nonprofits can build out their fundraising team as they grow, but before they're ready for a full-time development hire. This is, as you know, a huge issue for folks that you
Yeah.
need real expert development support before you can pay the, I don't know, six figures for a
Yeah.
development director. So I'm really excited to talk about that. I think it's really top of mind for folks, but I'd actually love to start with you. You and I have both been involved with this work for many years, and
Mhm.
I'm always curious about how people find their way into this work. So what is your origin story? How did you
Yeah.
get to this moment in our shared journeys?
So it's actually like we can rewind almost 23 years, maybe 23 years exactly.
Yeah.
Um, where I was a little lost in terms of like what I wanted to do with my life. I was in university and one summer actually I met two people just by happenstance who were professional fundraisers. And the light bulb went off for me. I've always been interested in the nonprofit sector. I volunteered in high school. I've always, yeah, it's always just felt like my DNA. My favorite part of my undergrad school was, chairing the Women's Empowerment Committee and doing these other
Me
activities.
too. I was one of those kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, when I discovered that you could actually do that as a career, I was like, what? That's awesome. So, like from that moment, I started preparing myself to become a fundraiser when I graduated. And I even wrote a thesis in my undergrad on feminist fundraising. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's
So you
like,
got bitten hard.
yeah, I've been doing this for a long time.
I love that. And I know that you have played lots of different roles in
Mhm.
fundraising, and that's really gotten you to the point where I think you have real insight into the different ways fundraising can sort of show up. It isn't
Yeah.
just one thing to be a fundraiser.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
want to talk just a little bit about what some of the different ways that you have experienced fundraising
Mhm.
have been.
Yeah. So what I would say is fundraising is one of those like significantly misunderstood roles in nonprofits.
Agreed. Yes.
Like, I can't tell you how many times I've introduced myself and people say, "Oh, so you plan events?" Um, which I mean, I have planned events, but it's actually a very small
Mhm.
fraction of what I've done. Or they like run and hide because they think you're going to just ask them for money the whole time.
Every single second of every single
Yeah,
day.
yeah. So a lot of people don't understand fundraising, but it like I have a full spectrum of fundraising experience. So fundraising is sort of what typically our sector would call annual appeal stuff. So direct mail, direct email, where you're just asking people who are on your list to make a donation, whether by check or online or what have you. Um, there's there are some events, there's the big gala type events, but also a lot of small relationship building events. Then there's major gift asking, which is very much relationship based. There's grant writing, cause marketing, corporate partnerships, corporate sponsorships. There's lots of different ways that organizations can fundraise. But the other big misunderstood thing about it is foundational to that, the part that we don't see sort of below the surface, if you're looking at an iceberg, the stuff that we don't always see is the systems,
That's
the
tectonic
stewardship.
stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's actually like a significant amount of what fundraising work is. It's, making sure that you're keeping records, that gifts are processed, that you're continuing those relationships. I often say fundraising is like matchmaking. You don't propose on the first date. And so you build up a relationship, you make sure there's a fit, you find that love. And so that takes a lot of time and work.
So I think what I'm hearing, or one of the things I'm hearing, is that as I grow my organization and I think about expanding our fundraising capacity, it's not just events and campaigns. It's not just
Yeah.
hiring somebody to come in and run our events and campaigns,
Mm,
and that it's actually deeper and more about this stuff beneath the water at the sort of base of the iceberg, which
yeah.
is strategy, which is design, which is systems.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing to me. And putting on the hat of my, growth stage nonprofit with a small but growing budget,
Yeah.
it also sounds like the kind of thing of I would think a full-time development director would have expertise in and be able to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So if I can't hire one of those magical unicorns, what are my options
Yeah.
if I want that level of expertise and strategy?
Yeah. So what I would say, something that has always, before I directly answer your question, something that's always bothered me about our sector is that I feel like we teach large size fits all fundraising. And so,
Totally. Or everything. I mean, people who
yes.
want to understand how to grow their staff, their board, their fundraising, and their systems look at like charity water,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
United Way.
it literally makes my blood boil.
I
Like,
know, I know.
no, we
Because it creates so
can't.
much angst. I mean, leaders feel so
Yeah.
bad about what they're doing.
Yes. And the FOMO is real and it just
It's
makes it feel
real.
like failures. So
Yes.
for me, the biggest thing is like small organizations don't need to do it all. And that's where the strategic piece comes in. So
Yeah.
I do see a lot of small organizations when they're getting ready, kind of like to preface your question, they're getting ready to hire help, but they don't have a big budget. They'll go for that junior fundraiser. And you're
Mm-hmm.
literally throwing this little lamb into a wolf den. Like you're putting them in an environment
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
no one around them knows how to fundraise. And so they don't have the mentorship and support to be successful. And they get pull down too many different tracks, and it actually ends up setting the organization further back because they get very risk averse. If it doesn't work out the first time they invest in this, they're less likely to invest in the future. So when there is a unique sort of need that small and growing organizations have when it comes to hiring, which is you want someone with the expertise, unless
Yes.
you as an executive director have experience fundraising.
Right.
And so the options until recently haven't been great. It's kind of like you can outsource a little bit. So I've seen organizations where you'll hire like a fundraising firm, like an agency, and they're going to manage your appeals. So they're going to write your letters and manage the mailing or
But still, it's very
emailing.
tactical. It's like they will execute on one thing that you tell them to execute on.
Yeah. And they're doing like, you can hire them to do the stewardship and relationship, like some of that stuff, but it's very much contained in, I was going to say in a container, but that's contained in a container. But there's firm boundaries around what they do. And they're very much experts, right? They're subject matter experts. They're the best people to go to. I mean, you can find an event specialist to do this. You can find a direct appeal specialist. You can find a corporate
I've seen
specialist.
folks do that with corporate and monthly donor, like building out an actual effective monthly donor campaign. I've seen people hire agencies for that. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you can sort of like piece out different parts of your fundraising to experts, and that can definitely work. One thing I actually have experience doing, and I don't do it anymore, is coaching. So I've coached executive directors, and I stopped because I found that they didn't actually do any of the work that we had talked about in our coaching. For a number of reasons. Some of it's mindset, some of it's time, and which actually my experiences in that led me to start offering what I now call fractional fundraising. And so that's, I think, like if this is Goldilocks, like a really nice, perfect fit solution for those organizations. So
that's what I've been really excited to talk to you about. I mean, it's all super interesting, and especially sort of thinking about what the right fit is given, and you talked about this as an executive director, what your zone of genius is, right? So if you are good at the fundraising strategy piece and you need executors, an agency, or if you have people that you think could execute, but the mindset piece and the strategy piece isn't there, maybe a coach. What I love about fractional fundraising, and I'm seeing fractional work pop up just in every aspect, is it's such a strategic framework or approach to getting actual expertise on your team. So let's dive in there. Start with defining fractional, because you and I we use that phrase all the time. I use that with some of the EDs that I work with, and I can see their eyes glaze over, which is like, I hear the words you're saying, I don't know what you're talking about. So what is fractional support?
Yes. So there are fractional, obviously fractional fundraisers, there's fractional chief marketing officers, there's fractional chief financial officers. The idea with fractional is that you are getting a fraction of someone's time at a fraction of the cost if you were paying them full time. But it allows you to hire up. It allows you to find someone who has the level of expertise and experience and efficiency that is required to really move the needle for your organization. If you are getting someone with experience, like if I can write a fundraising letter in like an hour, and it might take a junior fundraiser a week, right? Like,
and you would have to edit it, and it's not exactly right.
It's probably not great, or they're probably learning again those like large size fits all, and or copying some organization overcomplicate things. So a fractional fundraiser, that fractional model allows you to access that highly experienced strategic perspective, who will also in some ways act like an employee. So they are more like you are hiring than other types of consulting, where you're like, you're not hiring, and according to all the government stuff, like it's very much not a hire. But they're going to put on like an employee hat and think about
Yeah.
themselves and engage with your organization more like an employee than traditional consulting does.
So there are two things that I want to lift up about what you're saying that I think are really important for listeners to just sort of zone in on. So the first is hiring up, right? So
Mm,
I do a lot of trainings on hiring for growth. And you and I both know when you have a growing nonprofit that's small
yeah.
and wants to be bigger, hiring is tough, right? Sometimes you're
Mm-hmm.
hiring for capacity before you have funding, et cetera. So people's instinct for financial reasons is not just in fundraising, it's to hire at the low end of a workflow, right? Executors.
Yeah. And also, like our sector, the scarcity
Yes,
mindset, we don't want to,
absolutely.
we want to spend not just the low end of the skill set,
What's
but
the
like the
most I can
least
get for the
budget.
least amount of money? Exactly. Exactly. And, as a nonprofit leader that's growing an organization, that is like the best equation for overwhelm, right?
Mm,
You will have 10 people on your team that all report to you that don't actually have, right, all the reasons.
yeah.
So I always recommend hire as high up in the workflow as you can. And what I love about this movement towards fractional support in marketing, in fundraising, in technology, in finance is that it allows people to do that without feeling the pinch of having to take on a full-time salary with
Yeah.
benefits for more hours than they need.
Yeah. And also, um, most executive directors are craving less work and less
Yes.
responsibility. They want to
Yes.
offload. And what I've observed over my 20 plus years of fundraising is that, when you're building staff and you're hiring those inexperienced or like cheapest labor possible, it actually adds to your stress. It adds to the work you have to do to manage people, to have them perform at a high level. Like, and it's, like rolling the dice. You might find someone who's amazing and can grow quickly, like a stretch role, but for the most part, that hasn't been what I've observed. And we're like really bad at investing in professional development for those people. So,
Well, and that's a cost too, right?
yeah,
Is bringing
yeah,
people in more junior and growing them,
yeah.
which is the
And
second thing I wanted to highlight about
yeah,
expertise, right? You're really
mm,
highlighting there's the sort of higher up in the workflow for ownership, not
yeah,
execution. And
yeah.
then there's thought partnership,
Oh,
right? And it
yes,
sounds like what you're describing with a fractional fundraiser it's not just not a junior person. It's not just this sort of wholly external to the organization consultant. It's it's like having a development director
yeah.
that works for you part time. Is that sort of
Exactly.
how? Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. And but when I would say the benefit or sort of unique relationship that you have as a thought partner is like we're going to tell you when you're wrong. And this
yes,
goes back to one of the
yes,
first things I said around fundraising being the most misunderstood function in an
yeah.
organization. Most of the time, you're wrong. I'm sorry. And I say that with love.
I'm gonna let you be the one to say that.
Yeah. So many growing organizations, small organizations, they don't have a history of fundraising. And like I said, it's not you. Generally, people in society don't understand it. And
Yeah,
so when we look at things like Charity Water and we're like, we need to copy that,
we need a million
you're
dollar gala.
yeah, yeah, you're wrong. I can tell you right
Yes,
now you're
agreed.
wrong. And
Yeah,
so you actually really need someone who is going to bring that strategic thought to say, most of the time, what's effective for small organizations is like steady, tried and true, nothing too
yes,
inventive. It's just
yeah.
doing the work consistently.
Building the
And
relationships,
yeah,
building out the pipelines.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you need, like, I can tell you from my experience, I always tell this story of when it was my first fundraising job at a small women's shelter. And we were running a capital campaign, which I was like, what the hell's a capital campaign? But I
Sounds so
figured it
scary.
out.
Yeah.
And my board was like, oh my God, Oprah would be so interested in this. We need to write a letter to Oprah. And I was like, I was too junior and inexperienced and to be able to say anything, but of course I'll do that. And I did, and we
Yeah.
never heard back. But I tell this story when I speak at conferences and in other places, and everyone has their Oprah story.
Oh, yeah.
Every organization that's working with someone who's inexperienced is always pulling that person in all the wrong directions. So it is
So
a big
here's
problem.
my Oprah
You have a
story.
story?
So of course, I've always been in nonprofits, as you know, and my first job after law and grad school was at an organization here in New York City, an amazing organization, does great work, really good at fundraising. Except and the maybe second year I was there, we were preparing for our gala, and the board got it in their minds, their collective minds, that we had to get Sarah Jessica Parker. That her experience, so it was an anti-poverty organization. She was very vocal. She was very popular at the time, very vocal about growing up in poverty and supporting anti-poverty organizations. And they were like, hey, she'd love us. We know that. We love her. It's a great fit. Who do we know that knows Sarah Jessica Parker? And they probably spent like 9 months on that strategy. We did
Yeah.
not get Sarah Jessica Parker to come to our
Yeah.
gala.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, that is not what I took away from that, because I didn't know a lot about fundraising, is fundraising is really hard, because in order to do it well, you need Sarah Jessica Parker's and Oprah's. And that
Yeah.
doesn't work, right? Like that was my takeaway.
Yeah. And I mean, generally we reinforce that like every organization is different. And that's again where the strategic lens comes in. So as a, it doesn't mean that there's never going to be a time when you want to ask Sarah Jessica
That's right.
Parker for a gift, but you
That's right.
have to understand what's strategically aligned with your organization. One of the organizations we work with is a film festival here in Toronto. And they had an opportunity to ask Sandra Oh for a gift. Sandra Oh is
Yeah.
Canadian, obviously like incredibly successful. And there were relationships and they were successful. And it made sense. This was it's the organization is called Real Asian Film Festival. So it's not that I'm saying there's never an
That's right.
opportunity for that kind of gift, or there's never a time and place for a gala or something like that. You have to be able to evaluate what assets your organization has to work with
Right.
and what's going to make the most sense for you.
And I think getting back to the frame of our conversation, that's where having that high level of expertise and strategic thought partnership on your team around development comes in, right? As you are looking to grow, having someone on your team where that is their zone of genius and can say, we should do this, not that. We should allocate resources here and get the highest return on investment. That's when that becomes really important. So sticking with this sort of lane of how do you work with these people? How do you know organizationally if you're ready? What do you need to have in place to really be prepared to work successfully with a fractional fundraiser?
Yeah. So I would say some fundraising, just, you want to have some revenue coming into your organization, some sort of sense of opportunity around that. We are not miracle workers, so it's not that we can, shake trees and make money. And with the same is true if you're hiring a staff person, like you have to have something for them to come into, community to leverage, relationships to nurture. I would say if you have no donors, no revenue,
like no fundraising infrastructure at all. Yeah.
then try do a little bit to build up, but it's not that it won't work. It's just going to take longer to see results. And the reality is we're impatient as a sector, and organizations, the first question they ask is, what's my ROI? So if you want to see a faster ROI, you should have a little bit of fundraising in place. But I'm like, honestly, like 50,000 a year, 150,000 a year. It doesn't have to be crazy, but zero is probably too early to start.
You're not ready. Yeah.
And you have to see the value of fundraising, right? You have to have that, you have to be hungry for the growth, and be willing to trust the expertise of someone. You're not just hiring someone who is just coming in to do what you tell them to do, right? So you have to be willing to trust that expertise. And aside and be open-minded, because they're going to figure out what the right strategy is. If you come in saying, okay, I want you to do corporate fundraising, I would say, like, why are you making that assumption? So respecting the strategic lens that someone has. A lot of our fractional fundraisers even do things like set up the database and, do grant tracking and things like that. So some of the other infrastructure you don't have to have in place at all. And we
So
do
that was
that.
actually, my next question, which is then sort of conversely, what am I looking for? Like, do all
Mm-hmm.
fractional fundraisers do all things, right? When we talked about
Right.
agencies, you talked about almost like vertical specificity, right? So they
Yeah.
will do
Yeah.
a campaign or grant writing. If I hire a fractional fundraiser, can my expectation be that if our strategy calls for corporate giving, that person will be able to help us
Yeah.
build that out? Or am I looking for buckets of expertise?
So the way I teach fractional fundraisers to fundraisers, and the people I recruit to be part of our network, are generalists. They will be
Okay,
able to
great.
walk in and do all the things, but I can't say that anyone who calls himself a fractional fundraiser necessarily is that. But if they're through me, then yes, they're a
I
generalist.
mean, one way that I have articulated the difference between, say, a fundraising consultant and
Mm-hmm.
and a fractional fundraiser is along that
Mm-hmm.
specificity generalization sort of lens or spectrum
Yes.
that
Yeah.
if I want someone to do grant writing, I hire a grant writing consultant. If I
Yeah.
want someone to be the strategist, the thought partner, or the executor to build out my development workflow team, it's a fractional fundraiser. It's more like a development director.
Yeah.
Does that
And
sound, yeah.
yeah, I would say there are some larger or more established organizations that might want more specialized help in this model. But for smaller organizations,
That are
we
growing?
most of the time you don't even have the expertise to understand where to focus the
Yeah,
resources. So you need that generalist at that point.
amazing. So we've talked about how to be ready, what to look for. Last sort of question on this. I have this amazing unicorn on my team, and they're great. Are they really like a team member, right? How do I work
Mm,
with this person?
yes.
Is it more like working with a consultant? Do I bring them to staff meetings? How do I support them
Yeah.
as a pseudo member of my team?
Mm-hmm. So it depends. At minimum, I suggest organizations meet with, or like the fractional fundraiser meet with the organization weekly. Um, and sometimes that's enough. And I used to have a client, we would do half an hour every week, and that was plenty. But, we had a on-site activation with one of their corporate partners. And so we'd show up for that in person. We went for a tour of the organization when we started and got onboarded. Some organizations, it makes a lot of sense to be at team meetings, but not necessarily everyone. So it is very dependent on the organization and how they operate. But at minimum, a weekly meeting with the executive director. And the rest is
Which is the
very
same for a
customized.
development director. Yeah, I mean, that's how you'd work
Yeah.
with a development director. You'd meet weekly, sometimes
Yeah.
with program teams, sometimes with ops, et cetera. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
This is just so exactly what I wanted for this conversation. You have such a breadth and depth of information and knowledge about this. I know you also have a book. I would love for you to share the name of your book, your
Mm-hmm.
website, all of the ways that people can learn more about your fractional fundraising academy and your fractional fundraising network, and anything else you think people should know to build on what we've talked about.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the book. I wrote a book for reluctant fundraisers. It's called Raise It, the Reluctant Fundraiser's Guide to Raising Money Without Selling Your Soul. So if you are like, I really don't want
Awesome
to
title.
fundraise, thank you. If you're like, this is a necessary evil, I don't want to fundraise, but whatever, the book is for you. You can go to raiseitbook.com, or find it on Amazon or some online independent book retailers. Then if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, could I be a fractional fundraiser? You can
Absolutely.
definitely take my quiz. In fact, if you're like, oh, maybe I should consult generally speaking, the quiz can help you find the right consulting model for you. Now that URL is a little more complicated, so I think we should just include it in the chat because it is an affiliate link for our program, the Fractional Fundraiser
Great.
Academy, or include in the show notes. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I need a fractional fundraiser,
Oh, yeah.
you can go to findafractionalfundraiser.com or thegoodpartnership.com, and you can learn more about how our network works. They're not employees of mine, they're all independent consultants, but I work with them very closely and support them. And where there will be a lot more capacity in the coming months around, because right now everyone's almost fully booked. But yeah, we're going to have a lot of people who are available to work with organizations.
Amazing. And are you primarily on LinkedIn or Instagram?
LinkedIn, for sure. Cindy Wagman. I have
Perfect.
the Good Partnership has a LinkedIn account, but honestly, Cindy Wagman.
Amazing. Perfect. Cindy Wagman, follow her on LinkedIn. Cindy, it is always so much fun talking to you. This was a great conversation.
Yes.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of the Nonprofit Mastermind podcast. If you liked this podcast, I would also love for you to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you think that what we talk about here could benefit another leader in your life, please share with your friends. Finally, if you'd like more leadership in your life, you can sign up for my weekly 5-minute read Leadership Forward 321 newsletter. I send articles, resources, and inspiration every week curated around a leadership theme to help you lead your nonprofit better. You can sign up at richiebabbage.com/leadership forward 321. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you back here next week for more Mastermind.